What made 40 families sue our school district at the same time? My son came home from second grade with a rash on both arms that looked like sunburn. I asked what happened, and he said they had outdoor time near the new building. The nurse told him it was probably an allergic reaction to grass. I put some cream on it and forgot about it until 3 days later, when 4 other moms in our parent group chat posted pictures of their kids with the exact same rash. My name is Brianna, and I'm about to tell you how one elementary school destroyed the health of 40 children before any of us figured out what was happening. The construction had started 6 months earlier. They were building a new wing for the growing student population, and the school sent home cheerful newsletters about the exciting expansion. The kids had to use different entrances and avoid certain hallways, but nobody thought much of it. Construction happens. The first thing I noticed was my son's headaches. He'd never had headaches before, but suddenly he was coming home twice a week asking for medicine and wanting to lie down in a dark room. His teacher mentioned he seemed tired in class, less focused than usual. I blamed screen time and made him go to bed earlier. Then his best friend Marcus started having nosebleeds. His mom Denise mentioned it at pickup, saying Marcus had 3 nosebleeds in 1 week after never having one before. She'd taken him to the doctor, who couldn't find anything wrong. By October, something strange was happening in that parent chat. Kids were sick constantly, but not with normal stuff. Weird rashes, headaches, bloody noses, stomach problems. One girl lost clumps of hair in the shower. A boy developed a tremor in his hands that doctors couldn't explain. The school nurse was overwhelmed. She sent home a letter about a possible virus going around and reminded parents to keep sick children home. But these kids weren't contagious sick. They were something else. I started keeping a notebook. Every time someone mentioned their kid having symptoms, I wrote it down with the date and the child's classroom. After 2 weeks, a pattern jumped out at me. Every single affected child was in one of 4 classrooms, all located on the east side of the building, the side facing the construction zone. I brought this up at the November PTA meeting and asked if the construction could be related to the health issues. Principal Warren smiled that patient smile adults use when they think you're being paranoid. She assured me the construction company followed all safety protocols and the building had been inspected recently. She said sometimes kids just get sick more in fall and winter, but I couldn't let it go. I requested the inspection reports through a public records request. 2 weeks later, I got a packet of documents that were mostly useless, standard forms and checkboxes, except for one page that had been partially redacted with black marker. I held it up to the light and could barely make out a few words underneath. Soil samples, elevated levels, remediation recommended. My hands were shaking as I called Denise. She's a real estate lawyer and knows how to dig through records. She found something the school district clearly didn't want anyone to see. Before they built the original school in 1987, that land had been something else entirely. We started meeting secretly with other parents. 8 families at first, then 15, then 23. We hired an independent environmental testing company to take soil and air samples from around the school, paying out of our own pockets because we knew the district would block any official investigation. The test results took 3 weeks to come back. During that time, 2 more children developed symptoms. A kindergartner started having seizures. A 4th grader was diagnosed with a blood disorder that usually only affects elderly people. The testing company called me on a Tuesday afternoon. The woman on the phone sounded shaken as she explained their findings. She said she'd been doing environmental testing for 15 years and had never seen readings this high at a school. I asked what was in the soil. She paused for a long time before answering. That night, I called every parent in our group and told them to keep their kids home from school the next day. 37 families agreed immediately. 3 others needed to see the report first, but joined us by morning. We showed up at the school board meeting that Thursday with the lab results, medical records from all 40 children, and a lawyer who specialized in environmental contamination cases. The superintendent's face went white when he saw what we'd brought. The board members started whispering to each other frantically. Principal Warren wouldn't make eye contact with anyone. Our lawyer stood up and announced we were filing a class action lawsuit against the district for knowingly exposing children to hazardous materials. She explained that the test results showed the construction had disturbed soil that had been contaminated for decades, releasing something into the air that children had been breathing for 6 months. The superintendent tried to interrupt, claiming they had no knowledge of any contamination. That's when I pulled out the redacted document and the original version Denise had obtained through a legal subpoena, because what we discovered wasn't just negligence. The rest of the story is on my channel or linked below. Because what we discovered wasn't just negligence, it was a deliberate cover-up. The document Denise had obtained through legal channels revealed that the land our elementary school stood on had once been a chemical disposal site for Meridian Industries, a manufacturing company that went bankrupt in the early 1980s. The school district had purchased the land at a fraction of market value, knowing full well why it was so cheap. The testing company's report confirmed our worst fears. The soil contained alarming levels of polychlorinated biphenyls (PCBs), arsenic, and several industrial solvents known to cause neurological damage, organ failure, and even cancer. The construction had disturbed the contaminated soil that had been capped during the original building process, releasing these toxins into the air our children breathed every day. This explains everything, I whispered to Denise as we sat in my living room that night, surrounded by stacks of medical records and environmental reports, the headaches, the rashes, the nosebleeds, and why they all got worse when the construction started, she added, her voice tight with anger. They knew. They've always known. I called an emergency meeting for all affected families at the community center the following evening. The room was packed beyond capacity, with parents standing against walls and sitting on the floor. I projected the complete environmental environmental findings on a screen while a toxicologist we'd hired explained what each chemical could do to a developing child's body. "These are not mild irritants," she explained, pointing to a graph showing levels nearly 50 times higher than EPA safety standards. Long-term exposure to these compounds can cause permanent damage to multiple organ systems, particularly in children whose bodies are still developing. A woman in the back row stood up, clutching a folder to her chest. "My daughter wasn't on your initial list," she said, her voice trembling. "She's in Mrs. Peterson's class on the west side of the building, but she's been having seizures since November, and her doctor can't figure out why." Before I could respond, another parent raised his hand. "My twins are in different classrooms, one on the east side, one on the west. The one near the construction zone has developed a skin condition that won't go away no matter what creams we use. His brother is fine." By the end of the meeting, 17 more families had come forward with similar stories. All of their children showed symptoms consistent with toxic exposure, though the severity varied depending on which classroom they were in and how much time they spent near the affected areas. The next morning, the school district released a statement that made my blood boil. It acknowledged parental concerns about possible environmental factors, but claimed their own testing showed all areas within acceptable safety parameters. They characterized our independent testing as unverified and potentially alarmist, while assuring parents the school remained safe for all students. "They're gaslighting us," Denise fumed over the phone. "They know exactly what's in that soil." We decided to take our findings to Dr. Eleanor Chen, a pediatric environmental health specialist at the University Medical Center. She reviewed our children's medical records alongside the environmental testing data and confirmed what we already suspected. "These symptoms form a clear pattern consistent with toxic exposure," she told us, her expression grim. "The timing, the distribution of cases, the types of symptoms, they all point to the same conclusion. Your children are being poisoned." Dr. Chen agreed to examine any child whose parents requested it. Within a week, she had seen 37 children from our school and documented consistent patterns of chemical exposure in their blood work. The results were undeniable. "The levels of PCBs in these children's blood samples are concerning," she explained during our follow-up meeting. "But what's most alarming is the presence of chlorinated solvents that match exactly what was found in the soil samples. There's no other plausible explanation for how these specific compounds ended up in their systems." Armed with Dr. Chen's medical evidence, we confronted the school board again, this time with local news cameras rolling. The superintendent attempted to read from a prepared statement about their commitment to student safety, but his voice faltered when Denise produced internal emails showing district officials had discussed the contamination issue years before construction began. "This email from 2018 shows you were advised not to disturb the soil cap without proper remediation," she said, her lawyer's training evident in her precise, measured tone. "And this one from last year shows you decided to proceed with construction anyway because proper remediation would exceed budgetary constraints. You chose money over our children's health." The superintendent's face went from pale to ashen. Board members exchanged panicked glances. One of them abruptly stood up and left the room. Our lawsuit was filed the next morning. 40 families united against a school district that had knowingly exposed our children to toxic chemicals and then tried to cover it up. The local paper ran the story on the front page with the headline, "Poisoned for Progress. Parents allege school construction exposed children to toxic chemicals." The district's response came swiftly, not with remorse or accountability, but with a crisis management firm that specialized in educational PR disasters. They issued carefully worded statements about taking all concerns seriously and cooperating fully with any investigation, while privately offering settlements to families willing to sign non-disclosure agreements. Not a single family accepted. Instead, we created a website documenting everything: the environmental reports, the medical findings, the timeline of symptoms, and the district's attempts to conceal the truth. We held press conferences where our children, those who were well enough to attend, stood beside us as living evidence of the district's negligence. The story was no longer just local. National news picked it up, and environmental advocacy groups began reaching out to offer support. The EPA launched an official investigation, and state health officials ordered the school closed, pending a complete environmental assessment. We were no longer just 40 families fighting a school district. We had become the face of a much larger battle, one that would expose decades of environmental negligence and corporate cover-ups that had poisoned not just our children, but an entire community. And we were just getting started. The next morning, I woke up to my phone buzzing with notifications. Our story had made the local news overnight, and parents from other schools in the district were reaching out with questions and concerns about their own children's unexplained symptoms. "We need to go deeper," Denise said when she arrived at my house with a stack of papers and her laptop. "This isn't just about what's happening now. We need to know exactly what that land was before the school was built." While my son rested upstairs, his rash finally starting to fade after a week away from school, Denise and I spread our research materials across my dining room table. 3 other parents from our group joined us, including Tasha, whose kindergartner had developed seizures, and Miguel, whose 4th-grade daughter had been diagnosed with a rare blood disorder. "I pulled the land records going back to the 1950 seconds, Denise explained, unfolding a large map. "And what I found is disturbing. The property where our elementary school now stood had once been owned by Meridian Chemical Processing, a subsidiary of a larger corporation that manufactured industrial solvents and pesticides from 1962 to 1979. When the company went bankrupt in 1980, the land was sold to a developer who then sold it to the school district in 1985 for what we now realized was a suspicious outrageously low price. Look at this, Denise said, pointing to a document. There was a formal environmental assessment done in 1984 that explicitly recommended against building a school on this site without extensive remediation. It specifically mentions a containment barrier that was installed to prevent chemicals from leaching into the groundwater. Miguel leaned forward. So they knew. They knew from the very beginning. It gets worse, Tasha added, turning her laptop toward us. I work in the county records office, and I found these permits from 1986, right before construction began on the original school building. They show that the district applied for and received a variance from standard environmental requirements by claiming the site had been fully remediated according to the standards of the time. But it wasn't remediated, was it? I asked, already knowing the answer. No, Tasha confirmed. They installed a concrete cap over the most contaminated areas and called it a day. The documents show they knew exactly what chemicals were present. PCBs, arsenic, trichloroethylene, benzene, all extremely dangerous, especially to children. I felt sick. So when they started digging for the new wing, they broke through the containment barrier, Denise finished, releasing everything that had been dormant for decades. The realization hit us all at once. Our children hadn't just been exposed for the past 6 months. The entire school had been built on poison. While we processed this horrifying information, my phone rang. It was Lisa, another parent from our group who worked at the district's IT department. You're not going to believe what I found, she said, her voice shaking. I was backing up the superintendent's email server last night, and I saw something I wasn't supposed to see. 20 minutes later, Lisa arrived with a flash drive. I could lose my job for this, she said, plugging it into my laptop, but my son has been coughing up blood for 3 months, so I really don't care anymore. The files contained hundreds of emails between Superintendent Davis and various school board members dating back 5 years. In them, they discussed the site contamination issue repeatedly, weighing the costs of proper remediation against the risk of discovery. Look at this one from 2019, Lisa pointed. Davis writes, the EPA inspection is scheduled for next month. Make sure all soil testing is done on the west side of the property only. We cannot afford another flagged result. Another email from last year, just before construction began, was even more damning. State Environmental Agency called again about the proposed expansion. I've assured them we're following all protocols, but we need to fast-track this before they request another site assessment. The containment barrier has held for 35 years. There's no reason to believe disturbing it now will cause any issues. They gambled with our children's lives, I whispered, my hands trembling with rage. Miguel was reading another email thread. Listen to this one from 3 months ago, after construction started. Nurse Richards reports increase in respiratory complaints and skin conditions among students in East Wing. Recommend attributing to seasonal allergies and advising parents accordingly. Tasha's eyes filled with tears. My daughter had her first seizure 2 weeks after that email was sent. We compiled everything, the land records, the permits, the emails, and called an emergency meeting with all 40 families that evening. The community center was packed again, the air thick with anger and fear as we presented our findings. This wasn't negligence, I told the crowd. This was a deliberate, calculated decision to endanger our children rather than spend money on proper remediation. A father in the front row stood up. My son's doctor just confirmed elevated levels of benzene in his blood. He's 7 years old and might have permanent liver damage. Another parent added, the school nurse told my daughter her headaches were from too much screen time. Now we know she was being poisoned every day she sat in that classroom. Denise took the floor next. We've contacted the State Environmental Protection Agency and the EPA. They're sending emergency response teams tomorrow to conduct comprehensive testing, but we need to prepare for what happens next. She projected a timeline on the wall. The district has known about the contamination since before the school was built in 1987. They've been actively concealing it for decades. Every board member, every superintendent since then has been complicit. What about Principal Warren? Someone asked. Did she know too? I pulled up an email from 6 months ago to Superintendent Davis from Principal Warren. Subject: construction concerns. Several teachers have expressed worry about the dust and odors from the construction site. One mentioned the rumors about what this land was used for before the school was built. How should I address these concerns? The superintendent's response was brief. Remind staff that discussing unsubstantiated rumors creates unnecessary panic. The construction is proceeding according to all safety guidelines. She knew something was wrong, I said, but they shut her down. The following morning, state environmental officials arrived with hazmat suits and testing equipment. They cordoned off the entire school property with yellow tape and started taking samples from dozens of locations. The local news crews filmed everything, broadcasting live as officials in protective gear collected soil from our children's playground. By afternoon, the preliminary results confirmed our worst fears. The levels of industrial chemicals in the soil were so high that the lead investigator immediately declared the site a public health emergency. The school would remain closed indefinitely. That same day, we received word that the school board had called an emergency closed-door meeting. Denise, who had now officially become our legal representative, managed to get us access through a public meeting law technicality. We filed into the boardroom, 40 families strong, as board members whispered nervously among themselves. Superintendent Davis looked like he hadn't slept in days, his usual confidence replaced by barely concealed panic. This meeting is to discuss our response to recent allegations, he began. They're not allegations, I interrupted, stepping forward with our evidence folder. The State Environmental Agency has confirmed dangerous levels of multiple toxic chemicals on school grounds. Chemicals your own documents show you've known about for decades. I placed a copy of the superintendent's emails on the table in front of each board member. You received explicit warning warnings from the state environmental agency. I continued, my voice steady despite my rage. You chose to ignore them. You chose money over our children's safety. And now 40 children that we know of are suffering the consequences. The board members stared at the emails in horror as they realized what they were looking at. One of them, a woman I recognized as having been on the board for over 15 years, put her head in her hands and began to cry. We never thought, she began. You never thought what? Denise asked sharply. That you'd get caught? Or that children would actually get sick from toxic chemicals? Because your own documents show you knew both were possibilities. The superintendent attempted to regain control of the meeting. These documents were obtained illegally and cannot be. Save it for court, Miguel cut in, stepping forward with his daughter's medical records. My child has a blood disorder typically only seen in people exposed to industrial chemicals for decades. She's 10 years old. One by one, parents stepped forward with medical documentation of their children's conditions. The boardroom fell silent except for the sound of papers being placed on the table and quiet sobbing from some of the parents and at least one board member. By the time we left that night, the school board had agreed to an emergency resolution to provide immediate medical testing for every student and staff member who had been in the building during the past year. It was just the beginning of what would become the largest environmental justice case our state had ever seen, and we were nowhere near finished. The story exploded overnight. I woke up to CNN running a segment called Toxic Schoolyard, the cover-up poisoning America's children. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing with notifications, parents from neighboring districts, journalists from national outlets, and environmental activists from across the country, all wanting to know more about what was happening in our small community. They're calling us whistleblowers, I told Denise as we watched the coverage together in my living room. My son was upstairs, his skin finally healing after 2 weeks away from school. I never wanted to be a whistleblower. I just wanted my son to stop getting sick. None of us asked for this, Denise replied, scrolling through her phone. But look, environmental justice groups are organizing a rally outside the district office this afternoon. They're bringing testing equipment and medical professionals to help screen other children. By noon, our quiet suburban town had transformed. News vans lined the streets near the school. People in matching t-shirts with slogans like "No child left in toxic waste" and "Schools not Superfund sites" gathered with homemade signs. Dr. Chen, the pediatric environmental health specialist who had examined our children, had set up a makeshift screening clinic in the community center parking lot. We're seeing consistent patterns across all affected children, she explained to a group of us parents as more families arrived for testing. The blood work shows elevated levels of PCBs, arsenic, and trichloroethylene exactly matching what was found in the soil samples. She pulled up charts on her tablet. What's particularly concerning is how the symptoms correlate with classroom location. Children in the 4 eastern classrooms facing the construction show significantly higher toxin levels than those in western classrooms. Miguel, whose 4th grade daughter had developed the rare blood disorder, stepped forward with new medical records. The hematologist confirmed it yesterday. She's showing bone marrow changes typically only seen in industrial workers after decades of chemical exposure. She's 10 years old. The crowd of parents fell silent. Some mothers were crying quietly. I felt the now familiar mix of rage and heartbreak that had become my constant companion. We've compiled all medical records, Denise announced, holding up a thick binder. 43 children now, all with matching patterns of toxic exposure. The timeline corresponds exactly with when construction began disturbing the containment barrier. As we were discussing next steps, a woman I didn't recognize approached our group. She was in her 50s, professionally dressed, clutching a leather portfolio to her chest. "My name is Rebecca Winters," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I was Principal Warren's assistant for 12 years before I retired last spring. There's something you need to know." We moved to a quieter corner of the parking lot as cameras followed our movement from a respectful distance. "Principal Warren knew," Rebecca said once we were seated. "She didn't just dismiss your concerns. She had been raising alarms internally for years." She opened her portfolio and produced a stack of emails and memos. "These are copies I made before leaving. Principal Warren sent multiple warnings to Superintendent Davis about strange odors, unexplained student illnesses, and staff complaints dating back 3 years. I flipped through the documents, my hands shaking. There it was, in black and white. Principal Warren had been documenting everything, requesting environmental testing, even threatening to contact state agencies if the district didn't address the situation. The superintendent threatened her job every time," Rebecca continued. "He told her the school had been safely built on previously remediated land and that bringing up unfounded concerns would cause panic and property values to plummet. But at the PTA meeting, she acted like we were being hysterical," I said, remembering her practiced patient smile. "She was given a script," Rebecca explained. "The day before that meeting, she was called to the district office and told that if she validated any parent concerns, she would be immediately terminated and potentially sued for causing panic. Just then, my phone rang. It was Lisa from the district IT department. "Turn on the news," she said urgently. "Principal Warren just resigned." We huddled around someone's phone to watch the breaking news. Principal Warren stood on the steps of the district office, looking both terrified and determined. "After 15 years as an educator in this district, I can no longer participate in endangering children's health," she read from a prepared statement. "I was instructed to mislead parents about environmental concerns, threatened with termination if I spoke up, and forced to watch children suffer while the administration prioritized budgets over safety." She held up a thick folder. "I have documented every instance where I reported concerns about student health related to the school property. I have submitted these documents to state investigators and the EPA. I apologize to every family whose concerns I dismissed under duress." As we watched in stunned silence, Tasha's phone rang. She stepped away to answer it, then returned with wide eyes. "That was my contact at the State Environmental Agency," she said. "They've just uncovered falsified safety inspection documents going back 15 years. The district has been submitting doctored soil samples from uncontaminated areas while claiming they represented the entire property." The news spread through the gathered crowd like wildfire. Parents who had been on the fence about joining our lawsuit were now approaching Denise with signed paperwork. Medical professionals volunteered their services. Environmental experts offered to testify pro bono. By evening, the state governor had called for a criminal investigation into the school district's handling of the contamination. The Department of Education announced an emergency audit of all school construction projects statewide. The EPA declared our school site a potential Superfund location requiring immediate containment and remediation. Thursday night's school board meeting was moved to the high school auditorium to accommodate the hundreds of people who showed up. Every local news station was broadcasting live. The board members and Superintendent Davis sat at a long table on the stage, looking shell-shocked as they faced the crowd. "Before we begin," the board president said weakly, "I want to assure everyone that we take these allegations very seriously." "They're not allegations," I interrupted, stepping to the microphone. "They're documented facts. Your own environmental assessments from 1984 explicitly warned against building a school on this toxic waste site." I projected the timeline Denise and I had created onto the large screen behind the board members. "In 1986, you applied for and received environmental requirement variances by falsely claiming the site had been fully remediated. In 1987, you built an elementary school on land you knew contained dangerous chemicals." The crowd murmured angrily as I continued. "For 35 years, you've been submitting falsified soil samples to regulatory agencies. And 6 months ago, you knowingly broke through a containment barrier during construction, releasing dormant toxins into the air our children breathe every day." Superintendent Davis leaned forward to his microphone. "These documents were obtained through questionable means and don't represent the full context." "I have the full context right here," called a voice from the back of the auditorium. A man in his 70s made his way slowly to the front, assisted by a younger woman. "My name is Harold Jenkins. I was on the school board in 1985 when we purchased that land." The room fell completely silent. "We knew exactly what we were buying," he continued, his voice wavering with age but clear with conviction. "Meridian Chemical offered us the land at 1/5 market value because no developer would touch it. We saw it as a bargain, a way to build a new school without raising taxes." He looked directly at Superintendent Davis. "We convinced ourselves that capping the soil would be enough. We told ourselves children wouldn't be digging deep enough to reach the contaminated layers. We lied to ourselves, and then we lied to everyone else." The younger woman beside him stepped forward. "I'm Dr. Amanda Jenkins, environmental toxicologist. My father has been living with this guilt for decades. When I saw your story on the news, I finally understood why he's been sending anonymous donations to children's cancer research for 35 years." She opened her laptop and connected it to the projector. "I've analyzed the original environmental reports from 1984 alongside the recent testing data. The chemicals your children have been exposed to are the exact same compounds that were documented before the school was built, just at much higher concentrations now that the containment has been breached." The board meeting dissolved into chaos. Parents shouted questions and accusations. Board members whispered frantically among themselves. The superintendent sat frozen, his career visibly crumbling before our eyes. As the meeting approached its third hour, Denise stood at the microphone with our complete evidence packet. "We now have proof of a deliberate, decades-long conspiracy to endanger children for financial gain," she stated calmly. 40 families are currently part of our lawsuit. After tonight's revelations, we expect that number to grow significantly." She looked each board member in the eye. "This isn't just civil negligence anymore. The falsification of environmental safety documents and deliberate concealment of public health hazards are criminal offenses. We forwarded all evidence to the state attorney general's office." As we left the meeting, reporters swarmed around us, thrusting microphones in our faces and asking for statements. I was exhausted, emotionally drained, but also filled with a strange sense of vindication. Our children had been poisoned, but at least now the world knew why. At least now there would be accountability. Back at home, I checked on my sleeping son. His rash had finally disappeared, but Dr. Chen had warned us that the long-term effects of his exposure might not be evident for years. That uncertainty would hang over all our families, a shadow cast by the district's decades of deception. My phone buzzed with a text from Denise. "Attorney General's office just called. They're opening a criminal investigation tomorrow. This is just the beginning." I looked at my son's peaceful face and whispered, "We're going to make this right, not just for you, but for every child who comes after you." The fight was far from over, but for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like we might actually win. The day after the explosive school board meeting, my phone rang at 7 a.m. It was Denise, her voice carrying an unusual note of cautious optimism. "Turn on channel 6 right now," she said without preamble. I fumbled for the remote, my son still sleeping upstairs after another night of fitful rest. The news anchor's solemn face filled the screen as I caught the middle of her report. "Attorney General has announced criminal charges against Superintendent Davis and 4 current and former school board members for knowingly endangering children's welfare, falsifying environmental documents, and criminal conspiracy. If convicted, they face up to 20 years in prison." I sank onto the couch, a strange mixture of vindication and grief washing over me. "They're actually being held accountable," I whispered into the phone. "This is just the beginning," Denise replied. "Their lawyer called me an hour ago. They want to discuss settlement terms." terms. 6 weeks later, 47 families, our original 40 plus 7 more who had come forward, gathered in the community center to hear the settlement proposal. Our children sat in the back of the room, some still visibly bearing the physical marks of their poisoning. Tasha's kindergartner hadn't had a seizure in 3 weeks, but Miguel's daughter was still undergoing weekly treatments for her blood disorder. Denise stood at the front, flanked by 2 environmental attorneys and a medical specialist who had joined our legal team pro bono after seeing our story on national news. The district's insurance company has agreed to a $140 million settlement, she announced, her voice steady despite the gasps that rippled through the room. This includes comprehensive lifetime medical monitoring for all affected children and staff, full remediation of the school site, and individual compensation based on severity of exposure and documented health impacts. What about accountability? Asked a father whose third-grade twins had both developed chronic respiratory issues. Money doesn't fix what they did. The settlement doesn't affect the criminal cases, Denise clarified. Those are proceeding separately, and we've insisted on several non-monetary conditions. She projected the full settlement terms on the screen behind her. Beyond the financial compensation, the district would be required to amend all land records to permanently document the contamination history, establish an independent environmental oversight committee for all district properties, and fund a comprehensive study tracking the long-term health outcomes of everyone exposed. They've also agreed to public disclosure of all internal documents related to the cover-up, Denise continued. Nothing gets buried. Everything becomes public record. The room fell silent as we absorbed what this meant. After decades of secrets and lies, the truth would finally be fully exposed. We vote tomorrow, Denise concluded. Take tonight to discuss with your families. Later that evening, as my son helped me make dinner, his energy slowly returning after weeks away from the toxic school, he asked the question I'd been dreading. Mom, are we going to be okay? I put down the knife I was using to chop vegetables and turned to face him. His skin had healed, but Dr. Chen had explained that the chemicals he'd been exposed to could have effects that might not appear for years. I don't know for sure, I admitted, pulling him into a hug. But what I do know is that we're going to have the best doctors watching over you, and we're going to make sure this never happens to another child. The settlement passed unanimously the next day. Within a week, the first round of medical monitoring appointments had been scheduled for all 47 children. The district's insurance company established a trust fund to ensure the money would be available for healthcare needs that might arise decades later. 3 months after our settlement, I found myself sitting in the state capitol building, preparing to testify before the legislature. Denise sat beside me, reviewing her notes for her own testimony, while Miguel and Tasha waited with several other parents in the gallery. The School Environmental Safety Act, introduced in direct response to our case, would require comprehensive soil testing before any school construction, mandatory disclosure of historical land use for all educational properties, and criminal penalties for administrators who knowingly expose students to environmental hazards. Miss Brianna Williams, the committee chair called, we're ready for your testimony. I approached the microphone, my prepared statement trembling slightly in my hands. Behind the panel of legislators, a screen displayed photos of our children, their rashes, their medical charts, their haunted expressions as they described their symptoms. 6 months ago, my second-grade son came home with a rash that looked like sunburn on both arms. I began, my voice steadier than I expected. The school nurse said it was probably an allergic reaction to grass. 3 days later, 4 other mothers posted pictures of their children with identical rashes. As I recounted our journey from those first suspicious symptoms to uncovering the decades-long conspiracy, I watched the legislators' expressions shift from polite interest to horror. My son was poisoned because school officials decided that saving money was more important than children's safety, I continued. A kindergartner developed seizures. A 4th grader was diagnosed with a blood disorder, usually seen only in elderly industrial workers. 47 children have had their health permanently compromised because our current laws allowed this to happen with minimal consequences. I gestured to the parents seated behind me. We formed the Children's Environmental Health Foundation with part of our settlement funds. We've already identified 17 other schools across the state built on potentially contaminated land. This isn't just our story. It's happening everywhere, often in communities that don't have the resources we had to fight back. The bill passed unanimously 2 weeks later, with amendments that strengthened the testing requirements and expanded whistleblower protections for school employees who report safety concerns. On the 1-year anniversary of our first secret meeting, we gathered at Denise's house to commemorate how far we'd come. The criminal trials were still ongoing, with Superintendent Davis and 2 former board members facing the most serious charges. Principal Warren had received immunity in exchange for her testimony about the systemic pressure to conceal environmental concerns. Our children played in Denise's backyard, some energetic and seemingly recovered, others still moving carefully with the lingering effects of their exposure. The independent medical monitoring program had identified 3 more children with concerning blood work that required specialized treatment, but they were getting help now, their conditions caught early enough to prevent the worst outcomes. I never wanted to be an activist, I told Denise as we watched the children. I just wanted my son to stop getting sick. None of us asked for this, she replied, echoing her words from a year earlier. But look what we've accomplished. The land records for our school property had been permanently amended to document its history as a chemical disposal site. The EPA had classified it as a Superfund site, requiring comprehensive remediation. The school itself had been permanently closed, with students relocated to a newly constructed building on properly tested land across town. Most importantly, the Children's Environmental Health Foundation we'd established was now working with communities nationwide nationwide, providing resources for parents who suspected environmental hazards in their children's schools. We'd created a template for fighting back, for demanding accountability when institutions prioritized budgets over children's safety. As I watched my son laughing with his friends, his body healing, his spirit resilient despite everything he'd endured, I felt a bittersweet pride. We couldn't undo the damage that had been done to our children. We couldn't erase the anxiety that would follow us through every future medical checkup, wondering if new symptoms would appear. But we had transformed our pain into purpose. We had exposed decades of deliberate deception. We had created change that would protect countless children we would never meet. And in doing so, we had taught our own children the most important lesson of all, that when systems fail to protect the vulnerable, ordinary people can come together and demand justice not just for themselves, but for everyone who might come after them. The fight wasn't over. It might never truly be over, but we had proven that 40 determined families could stand against a powerful institution and win. And that victory would echo far beyond our small community, a reminder that the truth, no matter how deeply buried, eventually finds its way to the surface.